Let's jump right into it. Welcome to The Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here today because we're putting on our policy analyst hats. We're going to evaluate a truly fascinating, high-stakes system, the Department of Defense biosurveillance enterprise. Now, when we think about national security, our minds usually go straight to tanks, fighter jets, maybe satellites, but today we're looking at something different. We're exploring how the DoD takes massive, literal mountains of biological and medical data and translates that into global health security. So we're going to do a structured, top-down evaluation of this incredibly complex apparatus. We'll start way up at the 10,000-foot policy view and then drill all the way down into the tactical execution and, honestly, some bleeding-edge clinical research.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap. First, we'll define the biosurveillance mandate. Then, we'll look at the 3 strategic DoD missions. From there, we'll explore intelligence and data analytics, shift over to the advanced clinical research infrastructure, and finally, wrap up by evaluating the enterprise's overall performance.
Moving right into our first section here, defining the biosurveillance mandate.
Right off the bat, we've got to establish some clear definitions. What exactly does the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, mandate the DoD to do? Well, it's crucial to draw a stark contrast here. Standard public health surveillance is something we're all pretty familiar with, right? It tracks all kinds of hazards in human populations, just standard health data collection. But biosurveillance, that is an entirely different beast. It specifically zeroes in on gathering near real-time biological data for one main reason, and that's early warning. We're talking about the early detection of a bioterrorism attack, weapons of mass destruction, emerging infectious diseases, pandemics. It is quite literally the razor's edge where public health and national security collide.
And this framework brilliantly illustrates the logic model we're using to evaluate such a massive operation. It's essentially our analytical roadmap. You'll notice how the foundational inputs, things like funding and doctrine, flow directly into processes like data systems and laboratories. And then those processes generate outputs. Think reports, early warning alerts. Ultimately, we use this to track how those outputs hit short-term desired outcomes and eventually long-term strategic impacts. This whole structured flow is exactly how we figure out if the enterprise is actually working the way it's supposed to.
So now that we have our framework, let's look at the 3 strategic DoD missions. Now, what's really interesting about this is the incredibly complex interplay we're seeing. We are definitely not just looking at a single health agency here. We're dealing with 4 distinct components: the military services themselves, the Undersecretary for Health Affairs, the Undersecretary for Acquisition Technology and Logistics, and of course, the intelligence community. They are all feeding their unique capabilities, everything from health surveillance and international capacity building to medical intelligence, upwards into a unified set of overarching goals.
And those overarching goals consolidate into these 3 strategic missions, which are mandated by Congress and executive policy. Force health protection is number 1. It is the absolute highest priority, making sure we have a fit, medically ready force to protect the homeland. Number 2 is biological weapons defense, which obviously ties right back into protecting that force by countering weapons of mass destruction. And third is global health security. That's an executive mandate to prevent avoidable epidemics and catch international threats early. Literally every single DoD biosurveillance activity gets viewed through the lens of how well it supports these 3 pillars to keep the homeland safe.
All right, let's step down from those high-level policy mandates into Section 3, Intelligence and Data Analytics. To really grasp the execution on the ground, we have to talk about medical intelligence. This isn't just, counting hospital beds or tracking flu symptoms at your local clinic. Oh no. This is the rigorous application of actual intelligence tradecraft by the Defense Intelligence Agency. They're out there assessing foreign medical capabilities, investigating where disease outbreaks originated, and hunting for any evidence of biological agents being weaponized. It's all about forecasting a potential global health crisis way before it can destabilize a region.
To put the sheer scale of this into perspective, think about this staggering number: 70 to 80. That is the number of diseases of military interest that the National Center for Medical Intelligence, the NCMI, is scanning for on a daily basis. And they aren't just looking in our own backyard. They are tracking these threats across 165 countries every single day. That is what a global early warning system actually looks like in action.
Let's move to a practical example and see how this builds out during a crisis. Think back to the COVID-19 pandemic. The DoD used a platform under Project Solace. Basically, by securely ingesting de-identified Medicare claims data and electronic health records, the platform was able to identify specific risk factors for severe illness. And then, and this is the crazy part, it mapped out COVID-19 cases and vulnerability hotspots all the way down to the zip code level. That highly targeted data engine directly guided how the DoD allocated resources and prioritized vaccines when time was absolutely critical.
Moving right along to our next area, advanced clinical research infrastructure.
So transitioning from that global intelligence side, we hit the clinical research backbone. This is what supports our wounded warriors dealing with really complex combat injuries. This backbone is anchored by the VA/DoD Centers of Excellence. Now, these are not your standard walk-in clinics. They're congressionally mandated hubs built to pioneer research around serious, highly prevalent war-related injuries. They are intensely focused on the clinical side of force health protection, tackling things like traumatic brain injury, psychological health, extremity trauma, and severe vision and hearing loss. Basically, they're taking hard data from the battlefield and using it to drive absolute cutting-edge medical mitigation and rehab.
The crucial point here is that understanding conditions like traumatic brain injury, or TBI, or severe depression, it requires seeing exactly what standard technology misses. Look, a typical hospital MRI is fantastic if you need to spot a blood clot or a tumor, but abnormalities hidden deep within the brain's dense network of fibers, the connectome, those just won't show up. That is exactly why the DoD and its partners invest in advanced R&D assets, like the Connectome 2.0 scanner over at Mass General. It captures the brain in a level of detail that is just unprecedented, revealing the complex axon networks that actually drive our neurological function.
I mean, the capabilities of this scanner are practically science fiction. It uses diffusion MRI to track the microscopic movement of water molecules. That lets researchers trace the exact pathways of axons deep inside the human brain. It can even estimate the diameter of these tiny fibers to measure how fast electrical signals are moving through them. The ultimate goal? To map biomarkers for early neurodegeneration and build what researchers are calling a Google Maps for the human brain. For the DoD, this level of high-tech R&D is absolutely crucial to understanding, treating, and protecting against severe brain trauma.
All right, let's bring it all together for our final section, evaluating enterprise performance.
We've looked at the mandate, the intel, the clinical research. Now, looking at the output side of our logic model, the volume of work is just massive. Over 1,000 distinct, recurrent reports are produced every single year by the Armed Forces Health Surveillance Center, or AFHC. That is an incredible amount of data output. It clearly demonstrates that their population and data coverage for military service members is highly comprehensive and, frankly, of exceptional quality.
But as policy analysts, we have to look objectively at the operational bottlenecks, and they are pretty significant. Despite that massive data output, the core integration hub for all this, the Division of Integrated Biosurveillance, reportedly has only 7 staff members. 7! To oversee integration across the entire DoD. On top of that, AFSCS facilities are dealing with severe physical space constraints that stop them from expanding. And perhaps the biggest hurdle from a policy standpoint, there is currently no unified, overarching funding authority for the entire biosurveillance enterprise. These agencies are relying on their own siloed funding, which makes enterprise-wide resource allocation incredibly tough to manage.
That said, it's really important to note that these agencies are actively trying to overcome these structural roadblocks through sheer innovation. While staffing and funding are definitely huge hurdles, initiatives like Project Da Vinci show how the DoD and the VA are actively trying to bridge the gap. Da Vinci is an integrated data sharing platform. It's designed to securely pool centralized data and analysis for clinicians and researchers across both departments. The goal is to streamline these massive databases, cut down on IT costs, and ultimately improve long-term health outcomes for service members.
Which brings us to our final takeaway. The technological promise of the DoD biosurveillance enterprise is just staggering. I mean, going from daily global threat scanning to literally mapping the microscopic fibers of the human mind, the data quality is unmatched. But as we've seen, those bureaucratic realities, understaffed hubs, fragmented funding, they remain very real challenges. So the ultimate question we have to ask is, can the enterprise overcome its personnel and funding bottlenecks to create a truly integrated Google Maps, not just of global health threats, but of the human body itself? It is a challenge we absolutely must continue to track, because at the end of the day, our national health security depends on it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.